today's episode of Today in World War II, March 18th, the RAF promotes a legless man to the rank of wing commander. An absolutely insane story of a Finnish soldier against the Soviets going nuts on meth. And finally, the Soviet First Polish Army captures a city in Germany. Let's get started. So, if you've been watching my videos since I started this chronicle, you probably know that I have great admiration for Douglas Bader. He was famously a pilot in the RAF in the 1930s. Well, he was one of their best pilots. He was on their acrobatic team, and during a show, he crashed and he lost parts of both of his legs. I think one leg was from the knee down, one was a little bit higher than the knee, the other one. So obviously, he was decommissioned from the Royal Air Force because in peacetime, you would not have someone with no legs be able to fly a plane, which was the whole purpose of the RAF, right? Well, once they knew war was coming, he petitioned the RAF to allow him to come back. And by this time, of course, he adapted to his artificial legs. And it turned out that he could fly just as well, if not better, than he did before, because actually he could take more G's because he didn't have all that blood flowing down to his lower extremities. So actually, he could turn tighter, and it made him a better dogfighter. And I think also, I suspect that Mr. Bader had an irascible personality to begin with, but overcoming all of that adversity probably made sure that he was even more stubborn and more inflexible and more determined to not just make up for his disability, but to exceed what he could have done had he not had the crash. So he became a legend in the RAF. He ended up at the end of the war with 22 victories. I mean, he was just an inspiration. Even the top RAF aces who had more victories than he did, they looked up to him. Didn't necessarily mean they liked the guy because he was very hard to deal with. I know Francis Tuck, Roland Robert Francis Tuck, who had 29 victories, and who I consider was the best pure fighter pilot in the RAF in World War II, said that he had the greatest admiration for him, but they were like this. They just could not get along very well. They were always fighting about something. Well, anyway, on this date, he was promoted to the rank of wing commander, which is kind of like colonel, I guess, in the United States Air Force. He was in charge of these great, like three or four or five, I think three or four squadrons that he would command on these big sweeps. He did a great job, and he was shot down and taken prisoner. He spent the rest of World War II in prison camps. The last one he ended up being in was Colditz Castle, which is very famous. I know that like the back of my hand. He wasn't able to escape, but he took part in all these escape attempts. He helped as much as he could. And I remember one time he famously volunteered to try to escape over the roofs. A man with no legs. That's who Douglas Bader was. On March 18th, 1944, this is a crazy story. There was a Finnish soldier. He was fighting against the Soviets during the continuation war. This is in March 18, 1944. The continuation war only has a few more months to go. I think by the end of the summer, it's going to be over again. And the Finns are going to sue for peace, and they're going to sign a very similar armistice that they had in the Winter War. But Aimo was his name. He and his men, his squad, were attacked by the Soviets when they were having a rest. Well, Aimo had a secret weapon. He had some meth. He was wounded, cut off from his squad. I guess they had retreated. He was wounded, so he couldn't retreat with them. His squad thought that he was either dead or captured by the Soviets. Well, Aimo had different ideas about how that was going to happen. He had his Finnish will, Caesar as they call it, and he had an ample supply of methamphetamines. So he went on an adventure in the Arctic, in the tundra. He survived a week in the Arctic, killing Russian soldiers along the way. He eventually made it back to the Finnish lines. When he got back, he only weighed 95 pounds. Now, it's disputed how many soldiers he killed. He was so hopped up on meth that even he didn't remember 100% how many he killed, but it was a lot. So think about that. You're cut off, you're behind the lines, you're wounded, you're high on meth, and you kill all these Soviet soldiers. You make it back to your lines. By the time you do, you only weigh 95 pounds. As a postscript to this crazy story, he did survive the war, and he eventually fathered 9 children, which makes me wonder if he continued to use the meth to keep his strength up to be able to father the children. Who knows? Finally, on March 18, 1945, the Soviet First Polish Army captured Kolberg, Germany. That's now a Polish town. This was during the offensive where other Soviet troops were getting close to taking Gdynia and Danzig. Well, I wanted to talk about this from an overall perspective because this shows you that you had Polish soldiers fighting valiantly against the Germans, the Nazi regime, on all fronts. Some Poles, a lot of Poles, were able to make it to Western Europe. They fought in the Commonwealth. They had their own divisions, their own brigades, and so on and so forth. They fought with the British and the Canadians and the other Commonwealth soldiers. They fought in North Africa, they fought in Italy, and of course, and they also fought in France after the D-Day invasion. It just shows you that there was also a division, an army of Polish soldiers who fought on the Soviet side. Here's the thing, okay? And this is what you need to understand. It's all nice and well when you're talking about, oh, you see how the Poles fought the Soviet side too. They were allies. Here's the big difference, okay? When the Polish soldiers and officers came to the Western Allied side, they kept their officers. The Soviets murdered the Polish officers that were captured after the Soviets invaded half of Poland in 1939. That's the difference. The Poles who fought on the Western side, the pilots and so on and so forth, the lieutenants, the captains, the majors, the colonels, and so on and so forth in the infantry or the tank divisions, they kept their officers. The Western Allies didn't murder them. 25,000 Polish officers were murdered after the Soviet invasion. So the rank and file, no problem. Tovarish, come on in. You can fight. But they had Soviet officers. They didn't have Polish officers. There were no Polish officers. They were killed at Katyn massacre. So keep that in mind as you look at history and dig down a little bit deeper. That's kind of what I'm trying to do here in this chronicle, in this video series, is to help you understand some of the nuances about this stuff. Because if you take things at face value, you're going to get a wrong impression about things. Okay? Well, I want to thank you for watching this video today. I appreciate your support, and I will see you tomorrow.